Stephanie Weaver here in the Blue and Yellow Kitchen in San Diego, California, where cooking meets culture. My guest today is Elizabeth Bales Frank. Welcome, Elizabeth.
Thanks, Stephanie. Thanks for having me.
I'm really happy to introduce a new novel to you called Censorettes, and it's set in Bermuda in 1941. It's British women during World War II, so it's got all the elements that a lot of us who watch the BBC love. And this book will be out on November 1st, so just in a few days. So congratulations, we're almost at your pub day and your pub week.
Thank you. Yeah, it's very nerve-wracking.
It's exciting. And I know you've been working on this for a long time, correct?
Yes, that's right.
Yeah. So, sometimes books take a long time, sometimes they're shorter, but usually, readers don't realize that, an author might have been working on it for several years, or in your case, 10 years. Is that right?
Well, I went to visit a friend who was working in Bermuda. That's how I found out about the whole story. So I went down to visit, and her son was in either kindergarten or first grade, and he's now in his second year of college.
Oh my. That's awesome. Well, one of the things, readers, that you will know from this then is that this is an incredibly well-researched book, and all of the details of the era feel so accurate to me. And I loved learning about Bermuda. I loved learning about what these women did in World War II, which we're going to get into in just a second. But I'm going to do a food thing first. So we're making two things, Bermuda fish chowder and Dark and Stormy cocktails. And I've got some fish that I need to add to the chowder. So the way that I've slightly adapted the recipe, it is unique to Bermuda. There's a couple of ingredients we'll talk about later. There's some rum in there. But this is a local fish. Sorry, moving too fast for my microwave boy cameraman. This is a local fish that one of my friends, our neighbor Mike, provided for us. It's called cabria. It's an ocean bass, and it's caught off the coast of Baja, California. So the way that I've adapted the recipe, because I don't have access to whole fish and fish heads and fish skeletons and the stuff that you would normally simmer to make this rich stock, so I put half the fish in at the beginning, so it kind of all breaks down, and then at the end I just reserve some diced fish or cubed fish to add, so you still get that nice fish texture. So I'm just going to add that real quick, stir that in, and then Elizabeth and I are going to start talking about her wonderful book while that fish is cooking. And the fish doesn't take very long at all, so you can serve it kind of at any time. 3 to 5 minutes usually. It's pretty well cooked from there. And before you serve it, you're going to remove, I'll just show you now since I'm moving around. I've already removed the scary looking thyme bundle. And you also need to fish out the bay leaves. I was not able to find them, and they always end up in Microwave Boy's bowl.
I find them.
He always finds them. Okay, so Bermuda. Let's start with, I'm going to remind everyone, because I did not remember, Bermuda is not in the Caribbean. It is about 650 miles east of North Carolina. So it's more temperate. It's not as tropical, which is important because of some of that weather and the storms that happened. It was also a significant a shipping port for the British, who settled it in around 1620-ish. And brought kind of their culture to an island that did not have any native inhabitants, but they did unfortunately bring enslaved persons onto the island, and that's part of the culture as well, and part of the influence in this dish. So let's talk about the book. So you were inspired because you saw like 1 or 2 lines in a local guidebook or something about the Censorettes. Tell us about that. Let's start there.
Well, my friend who I was visiting was at work all day, and her son was at school, so I was left to roam the island. And as you say, it is more temperate, so it wasn't just beach time. And I saw these 2 lines next to what I call their version of the Plaza Hotel, this enormous pink hotel, that said during the war it was a station for the British censorship detachment. And people worked in the basement, intercepting the mail between the war from Europe, which was in a war, and the United States, which wasn't. And they uncovered a number of things, including a Nazi spy ring in Brooklyn. I should say that it wasn't just the British. A lot of the women were from various European countries. They used to brag that you couldn't Like they could not receive a letter that they couldn't translate. But then I went to the
Go ahead.
I went to the Bermuda Historical Society, which is a very small place, and said I was looking for information about Bermuda during the war. And I remember the man clearly said, "Well, you won't find much." And it's true. There was not much. When I came home, there was a magazine. There was an article in Life magazine from 1941. And I wrote to the Imperial War Museum in London, and there was one document by a former censorette on file that I had a local friend in London go retrieve for me. Since, in the time that I've been writing it, there's been a reporter at the Bermuda Royal Gazette who wanted to do a nonfiction book on the Censorettes, and we were able to exchange some information, but at a certain point I just had to stop the research and just get into the novel.
Yeah. And so the censors were the men in the department, and then the censorettes were the women, and they were kind of relegated to the basement. They did translating, they read all the letters, so any letter that went back and forth between the US and Europe was intercepted and read. And so they were looking for code, they were looking for contraband, just all kinds of stuff. And so that's sort of the basis for it. But some of the themes of the book that I saw were this notion of safety versus danger, right? Because the lead character, our lead character Lucy, is sent to Bermuda by her father because he wants her to be safe. Yet it turns out that's not necessarily a safe place for her to be. There's also kind of class warfare. There's culture clashes between the Americans and the British. And I also detected a theme of, would women just be better off without men altogether? Which is kind of intriguing and certainly very modern take on the situation, because there's that women weren't particularly respected, and the lead character kind of keeps thinking this one guy in Brooklyn Joe, is sending somehow he's sending messages, and her boss keeps kind of poo-pooing that, and it turns out she's right. I don't want to give too much away, but so there's spy rings, there's just all kinds of stuff going on. And so I love stuff like this. I would love for this to be a BBC miniseries. I just think it's fantastic, so I'm going to figure out if I know anybody I can send it to, because that would be great. So want this to be a miniseries because I can see it all, and it's like beautiful Bermuda and the period, but then there's all this really great intrigue and this male-female stuff that's going on. So you've got four main characters. You've got Lucy, who's our main character, and then her friends are Lark and Georgie and Ruth. And Ruth is an interesting character because, while we would not describe her, now we would say that she's on the autism spectrum. Probably Asperger's would be my guess. So tell us a little bit about Ruth and why you needed a character like that. I'm going to stir the chowder while you're talking.
Well, part of it was just for her skills. We come to find out later that they were all put in this room together for a reason, to see if they could be advanced, these four women, into a role of greater responsibility within the intelligence community. And Ruth has just remarkable skills of memory and visual mimicry. She can recreate handwriting, but her social skills are quite poor. And at the time and the place that she was raised, they didn't do a lot to address those kinds of things. They just thought she was unusual and weird, and they would have put her away if they possibly could. And I think a lot of Lucy's journey is about moving from her head to her heart. So the time she spends nurturing Ruth and bringing her into society is very important for Lucy's own character development.
Yes. And then Georgie, it turns out, kind of has some secrets. And Lark is also has some secrets, but she's kind of the more like the religious, sweet girl who's like organizing the music at the church and organizing Easter services. And so they're trying to make life sort of normal in the midst of being on this island where there's not a lot to do and there's a lot of monotony. And again, here's another book. This is the third novel that we've covered on this show that has ties to pandemic life, which is crazy to me because, you know, you've been working on this for 10 years.
Yeah.
And so there is that sense of sameness every day, and how do you make things fun and interesting, and there's a limited number of people that they can interact with, and then the Americans arrive, so then there's more people, but that brings problems with it. So so let me see if the chowder's ready, and I'm going to talk a little bit about, so you were kind enough to send me one of the key ingredients to this chowder. So this is Outerbridge's devilishly hot sherry pepper sauce. And so I'll put a link to their website, and there's a whole story behind this, but essentially this sauce is, they were originally local hot peppers, so bird or Peking peppers, that the British started figuring out if they threw a bunch of those hot peppers into casks of sherry, they would have this sort of fermented sauce that they could pour on the rations that didn't taste very good. And so, but this became this very much of a kind of a Bermuda thing. And so in the 1965, I think it was around there, one of the original families in Bermuda that founded Bermuda, the Outerbridges, this guy, one of the Outerbridges, founded the company. One of the other early families of Bermuda were the Goslings. And so Goslings dark seal rum is one of the other ingredients in this. So you can kind of see that there's this insular society in Bermuda, and that is also the case in the story, right? Because there's things that happen, and you know, people try to get justice for something that happened, but no one wants to talk about it because it's not proper. And I suspect that Bermuda is still somewhat like that, although I have not been there, so I can't say for sure. But how did you decide? I mean, I know you decided to set it in Bermuda because of the Censorettes, but were there other aspects of Bermuda, having been there on that one visit, that you felt kind of called to you as a location for the book?
Well, I remember looking up at the hotel and thinking, when I read those two lines about the intelligence community being there, what would it be like to be in? It is pretty much a paradise. I mean, it's not the Caribbean, but it is beautiful. And they didn't even have cars on the island. They might have had like one or two. I wasn't sure when I said that, the first Jeep. But it's just so not industrial and so pristine and placid, that to be sent there after, you know, Lucy sent there her father wants her out of the Blitz. And I just thought how very isolated and lonely she must have felt.
Right.
And the entire world is coming into a war, and yet they still just walk to church and, you know, wear their white gloves. And it was just like the contrast between those two worlds was what interested me.
It's perfect. And then, so there's scenes in London in the book, there's scenes in the British countryside, and then there's also scenes in Alexandria, Egypt. So you get a global sense a little bit of this war and this woman's experience of this war. And again, like I said, would love it to be a miniseries. So I will see what I can do. I have no power, but I will look into it. I'm going to add the parsley. So I have adapted this recipe just a little bit. One version of it called for ketchup. I made an early batch. Didn't love the ketchup. It was very sweet. So made a few changes. And I, whenever a recipe like this calls for something like parsley, like a fresh herb, I stir it in at the very end because I want that brightness. I don't want that herbiness to be cooked down. But I did just check, and I'm gonna just stir this in. My fish is cooked, the fish that I just added, because like I said, it does not take very long. So I'm gonna serve up a bowl. This looks so beautiful. I can't wait to show you guys. And I have my little fish bowl, which I don't get to use very often, so I'm very excited that I get to use my fish bowl too. All right, and I did find one more stem. Oh, there's the bay leaves. I found the bay leaves.
Oh, great.
That's exciting, because then now my white boy doesn't have to find them in his bowl. Here you go. Oops.
I like those bowls.
I know, they're cute. All right, then I have to look to see. All right.
Just
Tilt it without spilling. That's the trick. There you go. So let me get my spoon so you can see. So this is one of the little pieces of fish. So you can see that it's nice and firm. And you can see the nice chunks of potato. There's bell pepper, there's carrots, onion, celery. And you can add, if you want, you can add a dash at the table. They said you can add a dash of rum, and you can add a dash of this. Now there's two versions of this particular sauce. There's the original, and then there's this one, which is 12 times as hot. So I wouldn't recommend adding any more because it does add a really nice nice texture to it. But let me get my Dark and Stormy going here. So one of the very early scenes, our character is taken out to the pub, and she's served a Dark and Stormy. So Goslings also makes the ginger beer. So I'm going to pour, it's going to be mostly ginger beer and a very tiny bit of rum because A, it's noon, and B, if I drink too much alcohol at all, I get a migraine. So I'm just going to do just a dash, just for the show's sake. So anyway, and I think you procured some rum as well, did you not? Did you tell me you procured a little bit of rum?
Somehow it got drunk.
Oh no, Elizabeth.
Don't know how that happened.
This is a classic Bermudian cocktail, so I'm going to have a little taste of that. Oh, I love ginger
And the people from Gosling would probably like me to say that if it doesn't have Gosling's rum, it is not a Dark and Stormy.
This is true. Yes. So again, this is a local, local to Bermuda, founding family, and again, same with the Outerbridges. All right. So let me taste this, and while I'm tasting it, she is going to read for us. So set up the passage that I've chosen for you to read.
Okay, this is the beginning of Lucy beginning to prove herself that she's capable of more than reading letters in a basement. And it's based on an actual incident, because I don't think I would have been clever enough to figure this out. There's a Pan Am clipper that would fly from New York to Bermuda and then on to the Azores and then to Portugal. You should look that plane up because it is fantastic. It's a seaplane. And they they found this woman who had a diplomatic pouch, but because of Vichy and occupied France, they hadn't crossed off something so that they were allowed to look at her pouch.
Yeah.
So they've asked Lucy to come out to the island where the flying boat docks to sit with this woman and try to find out what's going on with her. The only other thing I think you need to know is that we've mentioned Lark, her church-going roommate who has a sweet tooth.
Yes. Okay. Perfect.
Okay. Madame Foulque did not ask about Lucy's business in Bermuda, how temperate was the weather, or how she had come to speak French as she did. In turn, Lucy did not ask what it was like to travel on the Boeing 314, or whether there were children in the Foulque household. She rather hoped there weren't. Tech entered the room bearing a tray as though he'd been a household servant all his life, a tea service and a plate of tiny sandwiches and slices of cake. Lucy nodded and averted her eyes, as though such food made up her daily meals. The tea sandwiches, the lemon-frosted cake, the raisin-filled scones did not excite her as much as the hill of sugar cubes in the bowl. She wondered how many of them she could smuggle home to Lark. Lucy removed her gloves very slowly, pulling out the cap of each fingertip before she released each hand from its sheath. She set the gloves by the plate of cakes. She dropped 2 lumps of sugar into her cup, picked up the Pan Am branded teaspoon and stirred. The spoon circumnavigating the cup produced a skating sound, which, as she continued to stir, seemed to grow in volume, like turning up the sound on a phonograph, until it dominated the room, over the breeze that rattled the windows and their swollen wooden frames, over the shouts of the men on the dock, over the murmur of the censors in the anteroom. She studied her tea as if the dissolution of sugar in a hot beverage required the keen focus of an engraver. Madame Foulque cleared her throat. Lucy understood the thrill of hunting dogs on the scent.
Ooh, doesn't that give you chills? Oh, it's such a great scene. And we're not going to reveal what Lucy figures out about Madame Foulque, but because you have to buy the book and read it. So Dark and Stormy, delicious. Ginger beer, can't go wrong. Rum, can't go wrong. Let me tell you about the chowder. So if you're not a fish person, the idea of fish in soup might sound just awful to you. The thing is, and reason I showed you that fish before it went in, when you have fresh caught fish, this particular fish was frozen right off, they fillet them and then they freeze them right on the boat. So it's unbelievably fresh, has no odor whatsoever, should not have an odor. And when you cook it, this particular recipe, they recommend, let me see, because I know I have it written down somewhere, grouper, cod, snapper, haddock, or sea bass. So those fish tend to sort of melt into the chowder. And this is also, one of the recipes that Elizabeth sent me calls for a 10-pound whole fish, which, is not something unless I'm going to go to a fish market, not going to have access to. But when I talked to someone from Outerbridge, she said, well, that's what she does if she's making a huge pot for a big family event. She'll do the whole fish, and they pull out the fillets, and then they essentially cook the head and it's called the rack, the whole skeleton of the fish. Several hours, simmer that, it gets all the gelatin out, so it makes this really rich stock. Then they pull that out, then they add the fillets towards the end. So this is kind of a shorter cut version of that, but you've got the stock that's made from the fish with, water, fresh thyme, bay leaves, a little bit of sea salt, black pepper, and a little bit of ground cloves. So again, the spices from the sort of that intermingling of the transatlantic slave trade are going to influence all the food on these island countries. And then you do a saute with butter, olive oil, onion, celery, garlic, carrots, green bell pepper. So that gets sauteed for a while. Then you add tomato puree and chicken stock or consomme. And then, I did get up very early this morning. New potatoes, tomato paste, Worcestershire sauce, lemon juice, the rum, and the Outerbridges. So it's all been simmered together, stirred in that parsley at the end. So when you taste it, you don't really taste fish. What you taste is like this very rich so if you've had Manhattan clam chowder, it would be the most similar thing. It's very luscious. It's got there's a tiny bit of a slight vinegar taste from the sherry pepper sauce, but not strong. A little bit of heat sort of back in the back of your throat, again, from the sherry pepper sauce. All the vegetables are really beautifully cooked, so it's almost kind of a cross between a soup and a stew. Not too sweet, because we didn't do the ketchup this time. Really delicious. And I did give it we have two neighbors that fish and share fish with us. So the first batch, they both got some, loved it. They're waiting for more. So I can highly recommend this recipe. It's definitely a little bit more time consuming, so it would be more similar to the ajiaco that I made for the Cuban book, Until We're Fish. But super worth the time if you've got a Sunday afternoon. And you can do all the prep the day before, and then it's a little less work. So super yummy. And so, Elizabeth, your book's coming out November 1st, Censorettes. If you love historical fiction, if you love spy stories, if you love World War II stories, that is our show for today. Thank you so much for watching. The buy link will be in the comments. I would really encourage you to check this book out. The reason that we started the show was to highlight books that are from independent presses like Stonehouse that are doing great work, really beautiful novels. And congratulations, Elizabeth. I thoroughly enjoyed it. I reread it this weekend just to be prepared for the show and loved it just as much. Lots of wonderful details and for sure a female empowerment story as well. So lots of good reasons to jump in there. You can find Elizabeth at elizafrank.com, and you can follow me at sweavermph. And if you're looking for links to the recipes and the other things, you'll need to jump over, if you're watching this on IGTV or YouTube, you'll need to jump over to Facebook. Stephanie Weaver MPH is where these videos live, with the links to the buy links and the Outerbridges and all that good stuff will be there. So thank you so much for watching. We'll see you again soon in the Blue and Yellow Kitchen. Bye.